I was also thinking, Natividad, that it's kind of sad that this is the end. I don't know if it's because of COVID or what, but it's been nice to see everybody and hear your questions and, have a little chat. Maybe I miss you guys, okay? Maybe I miss being in person.
Just admit it. It's okay. We'll let it slide. It's fun to be able to actually talk to people. I go to work every day, see the same people, and I come home and I see my same family. Not that that's a bad thing, but it's not an opportunity to go somewhere and like chat with people in general. So even doing this is fun. Okay.
All right, let me share my screen. I hear Bev or Jackie or somebody. Can you guys see my screen?
Okay, you can run around. Running
We went
around
and
is
looked at the beehive.
Oh.
He brought in.
On, so if you can mute yourself, Bev, or I'll just mute you.
Oh, who did?
All right. Okay, everyone can see my presentation? You good to go? Okay. And let's see, I think how we've started each session is to remind everyone that we've been recording these. So if you don't want it to be recorded, let us know if you don't want your name or anything on there. But for educational purposes, we're making sure that all of this gets recorded. So Emily, did you already hit record?
Yeah, I went ahead and started, so I didn't forget this time.
Okay, thanks, no problem. So emergency preparedness and ROCs. We have, this is always a perennial question about making sure that your community is safe and has a plan. Obviously, there are risks when you live in a manufactured home community. And one of the benefits to living in a resident-owned community is that you are probably more likely to have an emergency preparedness plan, or at least a board of directors that's focusing on this sort of thing. So my disclaimer up front is that I'm not an expert in emergency management, which will shock everybody. And I've also grown up I've lived in a city my whole life. I've never lived anywhere that had severe weather, truly. So I welcome anyone's input if you have comments or questions, because this is just based on research that I kind of did on my own. So I did actually learn quite a bit, which was interesting. So I'll share what I found. And then there probably will be some time for Q&A or discussion if we want to do a wrap up. So starting out with a quote from Stephen King. There's no harm in hoping for the best as long as you're preparing for the worst. So I think a lot of us can probably relate to this, that you want to hope for the best and you don't want to think about emergency situations. And it is usually rare that we have extreme weather. But nevertheless, we need to be prepared for the worst case scenario. And part of your all's role in a resident community and as ambassadors to your community is to making sure that you're planning for the worst case scenario, making sure everyone is protected. So I will touch briefly on storm shelters and the requirements, because that's a big area that we talk about a lot, and there's been different storm shelter projects and funding made available. But basically, one of the requirements in Minnesota at least, is that if you have a community with 10 or more homes and you were licensed before 1988, you must provide an approved shelter or an approved evacuation plan. So a lot of the times when we're talking to folks that aren't familiar with manufactured home parks, they assume that there's a requirement that there's a storm shelter. Unfortunately, there's not. If you were to build a new community from scratch, you probably would have to have one. However, it's not technically required that there be a shelter on site. You just need to have an evacuation plan. So that is typically approved by the city. If for some reason the city determines that, or the town determines that there's not a safe space for that community, they may require the owner to do that. And this is timely, right, for Medelia, as some of the city, the evacuation plan is now changing because the fire department was the evacuation plan, and that's now moving, right? So we can talk about that too. And everyone that lives in the community must be provided with this plan. So a lot of you, when you purchased the park, you received a lot of the information from the previous owner. Typically there's an evacuation plan there that's been approved, and that is distributed to all residents. It's usually pretty old because it usually was approved back in the 70s or 80s, and they just keep it on file and it doesn't really get updated or anything. So that's kind of the bare minimum requirement for a manufactured home community in Minnesota. Similarly, in Wisconsin, they just need to let residents know that if there is an emergency shelter, where it is, and what the procedures are for using it. So again, it's not an explicit requirement, unfortunately, that there be a shelter on site. So again, pretty minimal standards, I would say. So what kind of hazards or storms are we talking about? In this part of the country, as you all know, we experience a handful of natural disasters. However, I was looking at the map nationwide, and we're generally on the lower end of the risk spectrum, but obviously we know that these things do happen here and we need to be prepared for them. So there's natural disasters like flooding. Again, timely because Pamel Creek just had a flooding incident. Tornadoes, extreme weather like thunderstorms and lightning, and then fire obviously is a huge one. There's also other kinds of hazards that can happen. The water system failure, power outages, hazardous materials, some sort of structural instability. So if you have an old home on site or a building, that might pose a hazard as well. So this is just to give you a sense of kind of what we're looking at as far as emergency situations. One of the interesting things that I found was that there are a lot of preventative measures that can be taken. And I'd be curious to hear from you all if anyone's doing some of these. So annual inspections, obviously, I think everyone does those. The state also does their own, or county does inspections. And what you want to look for is if there's any blocked entrances to homes or a hoarding situation. Those are major safety issues, right? Because people can't get in and out. And there's a reason why we have all of those codes. Another one is quarterly safety checks. So I know some communities have received from their county or other resource like smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors. Sometimes like the weatherization folks give those out. those are good to have on hand if there are resources. Has anyone received that kind of thing from their local? You have, Marjorie?
Yeah, remember we had did that a few years back? I think it was with you, otherwise it might have been Rachel, but we had arranged something for the county to come and then we've had a sign up. And then we got like a little bag with some goodies in it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, I mean, ideally it'd be awesome to equip everyone with these things if they don't already have them in their home. I don't know how much that would cost or what that would take to do for all your residents, but it's just something to think about. And that quarterly you could be scheduling kind of safety checks for folks. So that's just another idea. Obviously, you want to have evacuation routes and maps. If I guess, especially if you live in a larger community, to make sure people know where to go. Another awesome thing is disaster supply kits. I don't know if anyone here has heard about or read about like preppers, people that stock up on supplies. That's not what I'm suggesting here, but and this actually gave me some ideas. I think it would be a good idea to gather some of these things, but some of the basic recommendations I found were to have water and food. So bottled water, if possible, and plan on having at least 1 gallon per person per day. And then non-perishable food, obviously. And then all of the other things that you probably will want to have on hand, like batteries, flashlights, first aid kit, things like masks, which now a lot of us are equipped with, plastic sheeting, duct tape. I'm sure the list could go on, but this is kind of the basic kit that people recommend having. A copy of your ID is a good one. So if your home floods and all of your stuff is underwater or who knows, destroyed by a tornado, to have something ready to go if you need to evacuate for some reason. And I think a lot of this is also top of mind for folks, given the pandemic and just that you never know what can happen. And also with a lot of wildfires happening and just natural disasters occurring at a more frequent rate. So it's just a good idea to have these things, at least maybe one kit like this on site. I think in a dream world, you would give every household a little backpack, a little red backpack with all of these things in it. I could see Natividad doing that, but not required, certainly not required, but a good idea. And then to update these things, right? Because food expires, even if it's non-perishable, eventually it does, things like batteries. So this is just kind of a list of things that are good to have on hand. So the main plan you want to have is something that your cooperative can refer to and that residents can have access to, ideally, or it really should be given out to every resident when they move in. But you could do this at any time. If you decided to do this year, just give everybody a packet or a letter that has this information. So emergency phone numbers, obviously, the on-site manager's information, hospital information, the utility companies. So if something were to happen, like a gas leak or an electrical failure of some sort, to have this contact information on hand so that you can contact the appropriate service. And obviously, most on-site managers or maybe even boards of directors have this information, but I think the key of what I was kind of finding in doing this research was that really the education of the other members of your community is really important. So you don't want to rely on one or two people in the community to have all of this information. So emergency procedures for those utility situations or for fire, you know, where do people go? What do they do? Those are all really good things to have in place. Natural disasters, again, an evacuation plan with a map. And then my example I was going to share was Park Plaza. So I'm going to share, I'm going to stop sharing that. So I asked Natividad today if I could share their emergency plan. I was looking around in our files and came across this, which might be old, I don't know. So they were gracious enough to let us look at it, take a peek, see what they have in here. So this is something that any co-op can create, and your technical assistance provider can definitely help you with it. This is just to give you a sample of a real life emergency plan. So it has, again, all the contact information. It's also in English and Spanish, which is very important. So the phone numbers are on the first page. And then they have, you know, who to call for specific situations, fire, where to evacuate, which block of residents go where. So it sounds like the west side of the community exits to 65, the east side of the community exits to Central. So those are sort of things that are really critical if you have a larger community like that, or if you have a layout where you have different sides. And then this is some information on the local warning system. So, you know, listening to the radio, weather alerts, go to the storm shelter, etc. And then there's a little map with shelter information and directions on how to get there. And I asked Natalia that you didn't remember when you guys created this, maybe when the storm shelter was built?
No, we updated it a long time before that because the one we had was pretty old.
We
and a lot
updated
of-
it in 2016.
Yeah, a lot of
Oh,
that was,
okay.
there was a lot of old stuff in there, and I see that, oh no, it's still the same. Okay. And it was all in English before as well. So it didn't have Spanish, and that was a chore to do, let me tell you.
Yep. And then do you have an after hours phone number for emergencies?
Yeah, that says it right there. That telephone number that's there is the 24-hour telephone number.
This one, okay. All right, so it was interesting to look at this. You know, I had thought, okay, an emergency plan is probably like a 30-page document and really dense, but as you can see, it's not. It's really just the critical information that you need.
Yeah, he was awesome.
So,
I thought he was pretty cool.
yeah, so it's just the phone numbers, you know, the map, the information, the critical information that you need. And then obviously updating this on an annual basis, if not more frequently. And if you need to get it translated into another language, I would recommend, if you don't have someone in-house to do that, potentially paying someone to do it. It probably wouldn't be a whole lot of text to translate. And there's certainly services out there that could do that pretty quickly. But when you think about protecting folks, I mean, as you can imagine, if it's not in a language you understand, it's not useful. So I would say that that is a critical part of this. So thank you, Park Plaza, for letting us take a peek at this. I'm not sure if we've really developed a template per se for this sort of a plan, but it would be something that I think we could easily help you with if your community does not have one.
You'd be surprised how many people do not know how to call the gas company or the electric company per se, because maybe they've never had to do that before or
Yeah.
whatever. If it's just
You
right
never
there in
know.
hand, it's so much easier.
Hey, Julie, one thing I
Yeah.
want to add that I was looking up that we did for Park Plaza, and I think would be an extension of this, was a lot of times the weather service gives, you know, warnings and watches that, and most people don't know the difference between a warning or a watch, for example, right? And this happens in in relation to wind or tornadoes or floods or whatever, severe thunderstorms. You hear this stuff all the time. So we had a separate document that said, when you hear that there's a watch, this is what you should do. When you hear it's a warning, this is what you should do, right? So there was a separate page that we developed based on the National Weather Service and the different kinds of alerts that they issue, which can really be confusing to most people because you don't know. It's like, when do I seek shelter or when do I not? Should I just be looking out the window or should we go to the basement? So that's another piece I think we could add to this.
Yeah, so it has just the public warning here. Yeah. And it might be a little different if you're in a rural area too. So that's an important note. Thanks, Tom.
That's good tip. No, we need to update. And we give these out to every single person who moves in.
All right, I'll go back to my presentation.
We talked about this at the RLI and the CLI, and I was surprised at how many people never even thought to do something like this. And even in states where we had some communities that are right by the volcanoes. And so how to drive to get out of volcanoes that have a lot of smoke that are causing your car, can cause your car to shut off when you're trying to evacuate, and when to evacuate. So there's a lot of other stuff that we don't even think about.
Yeah, and I was mostly just looking at, you know, for our region, but there are certainly situations that, like, sorry to use more real life examples, but lacrosse, you know, you're not necessarily, you're close to being in the flood zone, I believe, but you're not technically, right? Because every conversion project we work on, they look at that. The engineers look if you're in the floodplain, and that'll be noted. But you can still get a flooding, you know, incident, and it can cause major damage. And it's not just to homes; it's also to roads and all of that. I know Bobby is dealing with that right now. How are things, by the way?
I mean, pretty much I wasn't home when it happened, so I just saw pictures, but a lot of people had water in their basements that but as far as like the community, you can see where the water just came right down off the bluff, followed its path right to the creek. And Pamela Creek is actually, like, we have it's natural by us, but further down the road, it's actually cement lined and created for flood runoff so that people don't flood in this area, except for our part.
So a couple notes on ways or reasons to educate members. And I don't want to scare people, but it is really important to think about educating folks who may think that they can stay home and shelter in their home in cases of severe weather, because I know there are people that may be unwilling to seek shelter elsewhere. However, because of the kind of community you live in, you are obviously more vulnerable. There's more hazards, especially due to fires and tornadoes. So it seems obvious, but just some of that education of giving people options for where they should seek shelter or what they should do is really important, because there just is a higher risk than there is elsewhere. So there's a lower evacuation threshold if you live in a manufactured home park. So it may mean that you're evacuating in less severe conditions than a stick-built home or community might that has basements and other shelters. So that's, again, just something to think about. And there's all kinds of educational materials that are available. Like I said, information should always be in multiple languages if you have multiple languages in your community. Even if it's just a couple of households, I think that would go a long way to make sure it's in their language. And then again, I think most of us know this from living in the Midwest, but not everyone. So if you're in a tornado or there's a warning, you want to go to a building, a storm cellar or nearby ditch. Your manufactured home is probably not where you want to be when you're in the middle of a tornado, is my understanding. You don't want to ever try to outrun a tornado or go under a bridge. And obviously there's going to be debris. So I know this is very obvious, but I felt the need to point it out to everyone, because there are people in your communities that may be, for example, newly immigrated, and they maybe haven't lived somewhere where there's tornadoes and they don't know this. Or they haven't lived in a manufactured home park and they don't know that there's, additional precautions that need to take place. So floods, move valuable possessions, obviously find high ground, turn off the electric. Roads may be flooded, which causes additional problems. So again, it's just basic information, but these are the kind of things that members may or may not have a good sense of or may not think about. So the more that we can promote this information and put it out there, you're kind of planting that seed so that if there ever is an emergency, they know that there's something they can refer to. There's also a severe weather awareness week in April. And I checked and it looks like that's in both Minnesota and Wisconsin. So that might be a good reminder or a good kind of benchmark or date for the board to think about, is maybe every year you do something that week. Whether it's handing out the emergency plan again, or doing a flyer, or finding some resources for folks and distributing them, whatever you can do to promote severe weather awareness is a really good idea to do that in April, right before kind of the severe weather season. And I would venture to guess that a lot of your counties and Department of Health have additional resources that you could use to share with folks. And we can also look into finding some of those resources if that's something you want help with. So here are a couple of links. Department of Public Safety in Minnesota, Department of Emergency Management in Wisconsin. The best resource is probably just going to this ready.gov. That kind of has, here, let me get out of this. So, maybe I can go to it. One second. Can you guys see my screen? Do you see the ready.gov? Yes, okay. So this is the website that has kind of all of this is a government website, but it has all kinds of tips, information, resources. A lot of that emergency kit information is here, how to make an emergency plan, all kinds of information here. The other resource I found that was listed somewhere are these Knox boxes. I don't know if anyone's heard of these, but it's basically an emergency key situation. So if someone is, for example, trapped and you need emergency access, it enables emergency responders to get in. I don't know a lot about it, but it was just something else that I came across that I thought was interesting. So there's all kinds.
Is that for their houses and stuff?
What's that?
Is that for somebody could put that on their house?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, so it goes outside.
That's a cool idea.
Just, I'm sure there's all kinds of different products too, along these lines, but just to give you a sense of what's out there, and that, you know, there may be folks in their homes that are vulnerable or elderly that aren't always able to get in and out easily. Share this again. So that's it for the slides. I don't know if, and does anyone have any emergency planning questions, comments, thoughts that we could dive into? I know.
When we first became a co-op, we got hit with a tornado twice. And it was just like, we had a different management company at the time and we weren't prepared. Our storm shelter was that icky old one underneath the ground. Nobody knew how to get to the hospital. It was so chaotic and so fearful. The people were devastated. And I was at work. I think quite a few of us were working or at school because I was going to college at the time. And it just was hard to not be ready for something like that. How to even contact your insurance company. What are the steps to do to talk to your insurance company? Because, you just become a co-op. Most of us are regular residents with no background. And, oh, wow, I have to file a insurance claim.
Yeah.
They don't teach you those things when you first start, and it was hard at first, but we got it down now, I think.
Yeah, it's another reminder to review your insurance policies, right? It's really important to know what's covered, what happens if we have trees down, what happens if homes are destroyed, if the road is damaged. It's good to ask those questions of your insurance agent or ask one of us, to talk to them about it and maybe do an audit and review kind of what your coverage is, because it can vary quite a bit. And you may or may not have an umbrella policy and that may or may not cover it. So it's just another good reminder that that's part of your duties as a board member too, is to make sure that those things are in place and that you're covered.
You probably should be doing that on an annual basis anyways, even when you're trying to save money.
Yep. It's always good to review the insurance annually. I know it seems like things change a lot with what's covered, and I always learn something new when I talk to an insurance agent. So it doesn't hurt to give them a call and just ask them, what if this happened? right? What's covered? Because I do this all the time. So when we're converting new co-ops, I have to go out and shop insurance for them. And they talk me through all these different scenarios. Okay, if a home is totally damaged and it needs to get removed, does the insurance cover it? You know, trees, just miscellaneous things, equipment that's on site that gets damaged. So it's always worth a chat with your friendly insurance agent. How about these disaster kits? Does anyone have anything like that in their community? Like, do you have any supplies on hand that you store?
No. Our storm shelter has a backup generator for about 3 to 4 hours. There's also, you know, there's a water fountain that's already inside. And we have so much PPE and paper towels and toilet papers. It's coming out of our ears because of the library and the great grant that we got. But as far as having a kit in general, no. You know, what if it goes past 4 to 4 hours and you have no lights? So.
Yeah. Do you have like a first aid kit and that sort of thing in there?
There's one in the office, but there's not one in the storm shelter, which there should be. So guess who's going shopping? Now you're gonna make me want to go get one because now I feel bad.
No, that's not the intent.
Oh, but you know, I've been on the safety team for General Mills for so many years. Sometimes I forget to worry about my own safety.
Yeah, and you know, yeah, it's not to scare anyone, of course, just trying to be helpful. Yeah, don't worry about it. But yeah, if you're able to find resources or other means of getting access to those kind of supplies, if you work at a store or if you see any opportunities, sometimes things show up on like Facebook Marketplace or whatever. It might not hurt to pick up extra supplies just for your community.
It'd be a good idea to hook up with the Red Cross and have them come do an audit or help you put together stuff, because they offer up a lot, including the smoke detectors and stuff. But we tried to do the smoke detectors with the homes, and a lot of people didn't want people in their home.
Like, so they were installing them?
Yeah, they come in and install them. They had a program to put them in and everything, and we couldn't. Most people said no because they didn't want anybody in their house, which is unfortunate because it was free.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think your county is probably a good place to contact too. They all have emergency management departments and staff. And I know in Medelia, I think it was MVAC that went out there, and they had all kinds of, it was mostly weatherization stuff, I think. It was mostly like light bulbs and insulation for your outlets and that sort of thing. But they were more than happy to bring a bunch of supplies to the community.
Julie, one thing I was gonna say is if you have a good relationship with your town or county fire department, police department, or whatever, they're willing to come out and talk to you about these things. Like I said, I have my brother's captain on the town of Shelby Fire Department, so I'm not afraid to ask them to come in and help me with anything, or talking wise if we need to be, or if explaining something to me as it is in general. So don't be afraid to ask the fire department, police department, whoever, to help you out too, even coming up with evacuation plans.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks, Bobby. Yeah, I think, you know, we'll do our best to help you all develop these plans, but certainly if you know anyone else that works in that field and can help with this. It's also, a lot of this is tied to your municipality. So there are emergency plans for pretty much every jurisdiction. And they will list what their primary hazards are that they're focused on. They have a comprehensive plan that's several years long that will say what the priorities are and what projects they want to undertake in those years. So I know in Medelia, when we were looking at applying for FEMA funding, that the community had to be listed on the county's plan. So there's a hazard mitigation plan, and it had to say Medelia Mobile Village Cooperative, and it has to be included. So it's a lot of coordination between different entities, but that's kind of how it works. It sounds like through FEMA and through the government. And then I think, Emily, were you on a webinar recently about the storm shelter funding?
Oh,
Any
I wasn't able to make that because of
Oh,
some other things that were going on. But yeah,
okay.
obviously FEMA every year comes out with a grant application for people to be able to submit, requests for building storm shelters and the like. And I know, Natividad, did you all apply for that? Is that right? Or I know Medelia did, actually, that's what it was, Marjorie. You all applied for it several years ago. Is that correct?
Yeah, it didn't get very far. The funds are only available if they have an emergency that's been declared in the area, and they're also limited. So if there's lots of applicants, then the money is gone pretty quickly. So I would say in general, there's a lot of regulations around the storm shelter funding that make it not the best grant opportunity. And now that we have, at least in Minnesota, the state infrastructure fund, that's probably going to be an easier route to go to get a grant that way.
And there's the federal funds now too, the federal infrastructure bill that we're working on with Rock USA. So
yeah,
if that passes, that'll be available as well.
Yep. And then anecdotally, I'll just share that we spoke with TSP the other day, and they're working on some prototype designs for storm shelters. So they did some of the designs for Park Plaza, right?
Yeah.
So we actually had them put together a big memo that's lessons learned. So
Right.
they learned a lot in the Park Plaza experience, and they've documented all of that. And so now we have it in a document, and we're taking that experience and hoping to translate it into prototypes for other kinds of shelters in different communities. So probably in the next month or so, we will have those prototypes for different sizes of shelters, different kinds, and those can be used for applications to the state infrastructure fund. So that's kind of the plan, is laying the foundation for future applications so that hopefully Medelia can do a storm shelter, and anyone else that is looking for one. I guess Park Plaza is already set, but it's been interesting because Vaughn at TSP said that there's been a lot of interest in storm shelters even since Park Plaza built theirs. I don't know if because of the extreme weather that we've been experiencing, but it's like everybody's contacting him about storm shelters. So you guys kind of started a trend, I guess. I don't know, everyone's buzzing about it. So
I think
a lot of interest.
The story from KSTP Channel 5 News opening the can of worms about how many communities do or don't have anything, or if they had a shelter, they didn't have keys available, or I think about where Nancy lives, and their storm shelter has one entrance, no light, and it's backed up to the tallest trees ever. And I just was like, wow, this is where you have to go. And she's like, yeah. Totally,
Yeah, and that's what most communities have, I think, that I see, or else there's nothing, right? There isn't any shelter. Right. So I think that'd be really great to see that change in the next few years and get some more constructed, and hopefully there'll be more resources available too. I don't have a resource in Wisconsin, sorry, but Pamela, you are part of the prototype, so they are considering your space for designing something that would fit on site. if and when you do construct something.
Let's get to hear that the same engineer is still rolling.
Oh, yeah.
I thought maybe
Yep.
he'd say, okay, I'm never doing this again because it
Yeah.
was not fun.
Well, Von's the architect, so he wasn't
Yep.
the, yeah.
And the architect, yep. It's
Yep,
good to hear that.
definitely. Yeah, so we've talked about different kinds of prototypes, some that are underground, some are above ground. And then he's going to do a third one that is kind of a combination of a shelter that's maybe just the very basic ugly bunker that nobody wants to look at, but then kind of a wraparound, just regular building, like a community space. So that you would have the storm shelter, but that your community space is more like a regular building and not necessarily a storm shelter building. So they're working on that. And we're hoping to figure out the budgeting so that it makes sense and it's something that can be replicable, because I know that was part of the Park Plaza surprise, was how expensive that ended up being. So
We made it work.
you made it work, and you have a beautiful shelter.
A lot of begging, I'll tell you what. Sometimes that's what it takes.
So that's all I have prepared. If anyone wants to hang out and chat, or anyone else has other discussions, we could also do kind of a wind down on common ground and reflect a little.